Let's check out the solution challenge.
Let's do this.
Okay, I'll present my screen.
Welcome to the Google Developer Student Club's 2021 Solution Challenge. The mission of this challenge is to use Google technology to solve for one of the United Nations' 17 Sustainable Development Goals, aiming to end poverty, ensure prosperity, and protect the planet. Win cool prizes, mentorship from Google, and swag. Get help along the way from Google at training events, code labs, and hackathons. Submit your solution by March 31st, 2021. Register today. We can't wait to see what you build.
Let's get started. Developer student clubs are university-based communities where students learn about Google technology and use their skills to solve local problems. Welcome to the Developer Student Club's 2020 Solution Challenge Demo Day.
Hi everyone. The mission of this year's Google Developer Student Club Solution Challenge is to solve for one or more of the United Nations' 17 Sustainable Development Goals using Google technology. Citing the official United Nations website, these goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. During this video, I will show you how you can research these goals and brainstorm ideas for your Solution Challenge project. So starting with the official UN SDG site, the first thing I suggest you do is click on each of the goals and read the challenges each goal faces. For example, Goal 1, No Poverty. This page will give you a good primer to the challenges we face on our road to no poverty. And down at the bottom of the page, you can take a look at the facts and figures and the breakdown of targets defined for each goal. There's also an infographic you can check out to get a high-level overview of the current state of things as it relates to the specific goal. Go over the rest of the goals to get familiarized with them and see if any ideas come to mind about solutions you can build using technology. If ideas do arise, write them down to brainstorm further later. Another great site that can really help you generate solution ideas is DIAL, which stands for Digital Impact Alliance. We're going to focus on two tabs, SDGs and the building blocks, but I urge you to look at the other tabs. They are just as useful for your ideation stage. Okay. So let's look at the SDGs tab and take a look at Goal 2, Zero Hunger. This goal has 8 targets, which help you focus on solving a certain aspect of the goal. For example, Target 1, which summarizes as end hunger by ensuring access by all people to good, healthy food all year round. Okay, so immediately ideas start to spark. Maybe you can build a charity app that either accepts donation-safe healthy food or accepts monetary donations dedicated to providing food. Or maybe you can build a volunteering platform that brings people together to help the community at risk. Brainstorm with your team and see what aspects of these problems you are familiar with, or maybe you have access to communities who are dealing with the challenge. Having personal knowledge of a problem will allow you to design solutions which are far more effective and easier to adopt. Now, let's take a look at Goal 10, Reduced Inequalities. Target 1, achieve and sustain income growth for the bottom 40% of the population at a rate higher than the national average. What a well-defined target. Okay, so now you can start brainstorming again on how you can achieve progress through technology here. Maybe you can build an app or a platform that educates people on financial and saving strategies. Or maybe you can help small businesses grow through education apps or e-commerce and marketing apps that are specific to your community. For example, in my community, the elderly struggle with finding online educational content, and I might consider building an elderly-friendly educational platform. This platform can potentially provide the elderly with equal opportunities at learning new skills and at increasing their income. You'll see that going through these web pages will spark many ideas in your mind. Write them down and discuss them with your team. See which idea really strikes a chord with your ability and your belief. You'll be working on this for a while. You want to solve a goal that you are passionate about or that's really close to home. In the next video in the series, I'll be going through a demo case study. I'll pick up an idea and simulate the steps my team and I will take towards a successful demo submission. I hope the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals inspire you to solve for your community in a meaningful way. We can't wait to see all of your demo submissions.
Speaking at an AirMeet event? Awesome! Allow us to help you with the basics of AirMeet. As a speaker, you will be provided with a unique speaker link to enter the AirMeet event. Click on the link, and you will directly enter the AirMeet. No sign-in required. In case you have any issues with the link, don't sweat. You can just enter the session directly and ask the host to invite you on stage as a speaker. Once you've entered the AirMeet, you will land in the reception area. The reception is the official welcome area of AirMeet. Here, you can see what's happening live on stage. Check out the public chat and DM the host of the event to learn about your schedule. Click the Sessions tab, and you will be able to see the Go Backstage button for the session you are mapped to. Enter the backstage to have a private conversation with the host before the event, do a dry run, or to simply test your audio, video, and presentation. Once everything is in order, the host will be starting the session. If the session is already live by the time you enter the event, you will be directly taken to the live stage. Once the session has begun, you can present your content, share your screen, and connect with participants via chat, Q&A, emoji reactions, live polls, etc. You can also request the host to play your pre-recorded content in the live stage. You can switch layouts and put highlight focus on a particular speaker. Participants can use the raise hand feature to request to share the stage with you and interact with you directly. Post your session, you can visit the lounge. The lounge allows you to interact with the participants and build meaningful connections through virtual tables and speed networking. And last but not the least, to ensure a seamless speaking experience, you're expected to log in with laptops and desktops with Chrome 79+, Firefox 76+, Internet Edge, and Brave browsers with a minimum internet speed of 10 megabytes per second. If you are in an unsupported browser or device, you will not be able to present, speak, or interact in an AirMeet event. Have a fantastic and engaging speaking experience with AirMeet.
%82 of teams struggle with inefficiency in innovation. Testing and validating ideas is still a tedious physical process involving pens, post-its, and is difficult for teams to work remotely. Tracking the progress of multiple projects and storing their data is a complex and laborious task. Innovation teams also work on ideas in silos due to the lack of collaborative tools. This leads to a lot of innovation data being lost. Introducing PitchSpot. PitchSpot digitizes innovation frameworks for teams to discover, share, and build validated ideas for product development and venture creation. Reimagine innovation with PitchSpot. Here's how it works. Structure, test, and validate ideas on widely recognized innovation frameworks, such as the Business Model Canvas. Build roadmaps, workflows, and prioritize tasks to gather feedback for ideas. Ensure data security for your ideas stored in the cloud with SSL TLS encryption. Sign up for free to test and validate your ideas. Share your canvas with collaborators or share a view-only link with mentors, stakeholders, and potential investors. Learn faster, measure better, and build validated ideas with PitchSpot, your global launchpad for ideas.
Hey, hey, hey! Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming today to the 6th day of Ideathon 2021. And I hope everyone attending this session this evening is having a great Wednesday. So, firstly, I would like to thank our sponsors for hosting today's session. So, first up, we have the silver sponsors, StreamYard. Gold sponsors, Wantedly. Platinum sponsors, Airmeet and PitchSpot. Prize sponsors, Google, our online venue partner, Google Developer Space, our education partner, PSB Academy, and last but not least, our community partners, Google Developer Experts, Google Cloud, GDG, Singapore, and Google Developer Student Clubs. But before we get started with today's session, I want to introduce you to the Developer Student Clubs. So Developer Student Clubs are university-based community groups for students interested in Google developer technologies. Students from all undergraduate or graduate programs with an interest in growing as a developer are welcome. By joining a DSC, you will be able to grow your knowledge in a peer-to-peer learning environment and build solutions for local businesses and their community, which will be helping you bridge the gap between theory and experience. So our vision is to impact PSB Academy students and empower them to impact their community through technology. If you are new, please join using the link on my right. So in today's session, we have some house rules. So let me go through them. Firstly, you have to enter your full name if you are in Zoom for identification and attendance purposes. Just right-click on your profile picture and press rename if you have not done so. Kindly mute your mic if you are not talking to reduce unnecessary feedback, which may be disruptive to others. Don't worry, if you have any questions later, there will be a Q&A session at the end. Be polite and courteous. No offensive or rude language to be used verbally or in the chat box. No form of offensive behavior or language is condoned in this session. You may raise your hand, type in the chat box, or use your microphone to speak or to raise a question in a clear, concise manner. The moderators and speakers have the right to reject any questions that may be deemed inappropriate or sensitive. And lastly, the moderators reserve the right to remove participants who do not observe the house rules. This event will be recorded for publicity purposes. By entering this session, you are consenting to have photos or videos containing you and your voice to be taken. So let's get back to it. Welcome again to Day 6 of Ideathon 2021. I am your host, Enver, and I'm a student in PSB Academy and currently studying Bachelor of Information Technology. So in today's agenda, we have the opening and the house rules, which is already done. Later on, we have two speakers. Our first speaker will be Mr. Francis Alturas, and then our second speaker will be Mr. Joshua. And then lastly, we will have a short Q&A and closing. So our first speaker, Mr. Francis Alturas. He is the co-founder and CDO of Abstract Digital, a digital product design agency from the sunny hills of Cebu City. He designs interfaces and experiences that are usable and delightful for human beings. He facilitates design sprints, writes sketch, and dribble meetups. He's also worked with people from brands like 500 Startups, Rocket Internet, the World Bank, and the Presidential Communications Office. Prior to that, Francis was also a design director at Simp, a startup foundry where he had built and mentored the design team. So let's welcome Mr. Francis.
Hey, Enver. Thanks for inviting.
Hey, Mr. Francis. So UI seems like a really important topic, and I really want to hear more about what you're gonna say later on.
Yeah, pretty excited to share as well. Let me share my screen first.
All right.
All right, there we go.
All right. Nice.
All right, cool.
So now I will just pass the time to Mr. Francis to talk about the tips and tricks to improve your interface.
Thank you, Enver. So hi, everyone. So I think Enver already did the necessary introductions. So I'm Francis, and I'm currently the co-founder and CDO of Abstract Digital. Basically, we're a product design agency working for venture-backed startups in Southeast Asia. And we love doing design sprints with them. And most notably, we've worked with a lot of startups from Rocket Internet, from Reinvent Ventures, and a lot more. So yeah, it's just some of the things that we do in the office. So aside from that, I'm actually also so passionate about organizing design events. So these are past events that I've organized, like dribble meetups, sketch meetups, and some UX UX events as well in the country. So yeah, other than that, I also enjoy speaking, mentoring designers, attending UX events, and just meeting with like-minded people as well. All right. So my talk today would be about how to cheat at UI design. And basically, I'm gonna be giving you some bite-sized tips and tricks on improving your user interface. Um, it's kind of hard to explain a concept without having an example. So I took up a random airline site from our country, in the Philippines. And I mean, it's good. It's working. It's usable. A lot of people can book through it, no problem. But this is exactly a good example for us to apply some tips and trips on improving the interface. So yeah, let's get to it. All right. Looking at, I basically just want to share everyone like what's my thought process, what goes into my head, like trying to redesign and applying concepts here as we go along. So you can see here, layout looks okay, it's usable. One of the things that immediately caught my eye is the use of images. So we want to improve that. Um, so tip number one, use good photos. Um, One of the sites that I really like to use to get high quality royalty free images will be Unsplash. There are a lot of stock photo sites that you can grab photos from. But if you're working with your stakeholder and they also have like a photo bank of assets and images, that would be good. So for this example, I'm using Unsplash. And for my design tool, I'm using Figma. And luckily, there is a plugin for Unsplash where I can immediately search for images here and just type any keyword I like. And basically, it would just show up all related results for that keyword. So since it's an airline company, I wanted something related to airplane. So I typed in airplane and replaced the header with a better quality image. All right, so far looks good. All right, so next thing, um, I noticed that on the left side there is this hero banner of text, and it's not really getting a lot of attention. Considering in our culture we read from left to right, so we process information from left to right, and I understand that the booking information to book flights is on the left, but we might miss reading like the information on the right. So I kind of swap both elements, both components. Anyways, my eye is still drawn um, into the book flight widget since it's really big and it's super noticeable. So yeah, all right. Tip number two, you don't have to fill up the whole screen. So one of the things that I've noticed is that this is actually I think a 1440 pixel wide viewport, and everything is just stretched out. So you don't have to fill up the whole screen. And just going back a little bit of history. So there was a time when I was using when monitors were smaller, and these are I'm talking about the CRT monitors, which has like a back thing in front of the panel, so it's super big. And a lot of the resolutions that we were operating back in the day was 1024 by 768, and having a grid system of 960 was perfect during that time. And throughout the years, there has been a lot of changes. So these are like the statistics for the screen resolution from 10 years ago. So this was from November 2010 to November 2020. And I'd like to focus on three things here. So there are three lines here, and on the green line that you see is the 1024 by 768 resolution, which we use the 960 grid for. And you can see that there's a decline of this screen resolution, and inversely proportional to that is the rise of high resolution monitors or screens. So you can see there's this 1366 by 768, slowly getting up here. And even the 1920 by 1080p resolution, it's slowly gaining a lot of adoption and traction, which means we should be operating on a different grid. And that also means that you don't have to necessarily fill up the whole space. Um, and here's an example why. So this is actually a screenshot for Medium, and you can see if we try to fill up the whole space, you can imagine how the lines for reading blogs would look like. So it's trying to expand the whole space that you see here, and the article feels long. Like when you read one line or a sentence, it feels long. But if you try to reduce the space, suddenly the information seems easier to digest, easier to read. And what we've changed is just how shorter the lines are. And suddenly this becomes much more easier to read compared to this one. And that's why you don't need to fill up the whole space. So we're gonna apply the same principle here into this layout. Um, White space is good. So applying a grid system here. So you can see there's a good difference. Typically, this looks more pleasing compared to this one. And this is the grid in action. So for this example, I'm just using a Bootstrap 4 grid. And these are the actual highlights of the gutter. This is my viewport. And this is the my content with some margins on the side. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, grids are just grids. They're guidelines. You can create your own grids as well. I think there's CSS grids already, which allows you that flexibility. So yeah, use it as a guide, not exactly as a rule. All right. So tip number 3, give text consistent contrast. So there, you might notice on the left side, there is this widget here or component wherein they have the hero text and some supporting text for the hero banner and some call to action. And the reason why they actually added a blue background, which has a little bit of opacity, is to make this readable because it's hard to scale reading this text on the background image happening behind. So they just added a background color, which is okay, but it feels a little bit, the layout feels too blocky. Like your booking form is square and you have another square here and everything looks square. And we try to make it as fluid as possible. So what we can actually do here to have contrast is to essentially just make this into a heading for the hero section. So just put it there instead of putting it in a box, so you don't have a super boxy feel of the layout. And the next problem would be the readability of the text. So how do we make this readable? We can play around with the background, add a little bit of the black opacity, but I think there's still a way to improve this by using the brand colors. So let's apply the navy blue brand color, which is present throughout the site. Looks better now. It's okay compared to the black. We want to keep the contrast better. The image in the background still bleeds a bit. I mean, the image in the background is basically just for us to give us an idea of the airline, it being like an airline company, but it's not really the main star. The main star here is actually the hero section and the text and the content. Design is basically just designing the content. So here's a trick that I usually do. I usually take the brand color, and for the images, I set saturation to 0, and then I apply a multiply blending mode for the brand color. So we end up with something like this, and it feels like the effect is too strong. So I want to tone it down a bit, and there you have it. It looks subtle. The background looks subtle. It's not glaring, and the text is super readable and has super great contrast, which is really important at this case. Okay, so yeah, like I mentioned, I felt like the layout is too blocky. Just because it's a nav bar doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a bar. So I'm taking it out. I want the layout to breathe, to be more continuous. So I'm taking the bar out and adding a little bit of space so the layout can breathe. So yeah, come this definitely looks a lot better. All right. So tip number 4, establish a type scale. So what do I mean by a type scale? It's essentially preparing ahead the type sizes that you're going to be using in your layout or in your interface. Um, a lot of people would probably recommend to use a type scale, such as this one. This is actually a major third scale. You can experiment with different fonts, different base sizes, and you can even use the golden ratio for this. But my only caveat with this one is that you're going to end up with magic numbers for the pixels. I mean, for the pixel size, you're going to have something like this, like 48 or 83, and it's going to throw off your developer. And I usually implement the designs on my end, so I'm also not a fan of this one. You could use something like this, um, like finalizing on the actual type sizes. You can do as you design, but establishing a baseline for what type sizes you're gonna use is gonna save you a lot of time. You can't be wasting a lot of your time like choosing between should I use 13, should I use 14? Does it look good? Does it look bad? This definitely cuts all that decision making, micro decision making when you're designing the interface. So immediately you can just pick up values and then just adjust along the way. So this isn't a strict rule. This is just like a baseline that you can use. And essentially almost every project, actually all projects that I started with something like this. I establish a type scale, like my headings, my buttons, my body text. Um, this isn't a final one, but it's a good place to start, and it cuts a lot of decision making for me. So applying that here in our current layout, so you can see it here. I also added some spacing, and you can see the type scale here for my heading hero text here. Looks a little bit better compared to the previous one. So, all right, tip number 5, supercharge the defaults. So just because there are default looking elements for HTML5, and this is how a radio button would look like, this is how a drop down, this is how a checkbox would look like, doesn't mean you necessarily have to use it. You can supercharge the defaults and make it better. So you can see here a radio button that I've improved. So I made it bigger, so the touch point is a little bit bigger and it's easier to see and easier to click to. And you can see the labels for this form. Um, I'm not really a fan of all caps label. Firstly, because it's harder to read. It's easier to read labels when they're in a sentence case or title case. So I'm implementing it here. Other things that we can improve on is for users to immediately have an idea of what information you're asking for, so you can actually add icons as supporting actor for these fields. So I see this location markers. It would immediately give me an idea that this parts are asking me for location. This parts here are asking me for dates. So it's a good supporting visual element to the drop downs. And of course, it's too much to empower. It's too it's grabbing too much attention because of the contrast. So you need to dial it down a bit, turn down the opacity, so it doesn't like disrupt. And yeah, tip number 6, establishing a spacing system. So previously, what we did was establish a type scale, and it allowed us to just immediately cut through our decision making process of nudging numbers. So the same with spacing as well. Um, if you are more consistent on the spacing within your layout between different elements, it's gonna look much more in order. So for this example, I'm using um, a 4-point spacing scale. So you can see here, it's all the spacing that I have is divisible by 4, and it's also easier to implement on the engineering side. So yeah, one good tip is, while usually when I'm designing, I'm also thinking in terms of implementation, so developers you know, won't be thrown off with different magic numbers that you have. So you have 20 pixel per space between each row here, between the labels and the input. You have 8, 16, and so forth. Everything divisible by 4. So yeah, looks better now. And of course, I wanted the icons to be on brand as well. So instead of using the black and being gray, I'm adding a little bit of bluish hue to the icon, since I wanted it to be in line with the branding. So we're using navy blue for this one. All right. So tip number 7, overlap elements to create layers. So a lot of the layout during the early web, it was like a cookie cutter, wherein everything is like a rectangle, like every section is rectangular. And if you want to improve your UI design skills, try to overlap elements or sections to create that sense of continuity in the layout. So you can see here clearly that on the hero section, there's a clear cut here, and probably there's another section here in the bottom. So how do I make this a little bit continuous? And it's super simple. I just overlap the booking component here, booking widget, to the bottom, and suddenly it feels a little bit more continuous. Like, it's not like a cookie cutter. It's not full of rectangles. So in addition to that, use shadow to create elevation. So your layout doesn't have to look very flat. You use the power of shadows to create the illusion of elevation on different elements. And depending on what elements you want to prioritize or bring in front of the user to get their attention, that's also how much shadow or elevation you're going to use. So one of the tips that I use to create really good shadows, I've seen a lot of interfaces with really harsh shadows, and I take inspiration from nature itself. So there are two types of light being casted um, on this spot. You can see the direct light, which is from a specific direct light source, and you can see the ambient light, which is also another light source. So applying those principles to the web. So basically, this is casting two shadows, actually. A shadow here underneath the spot, and a shadow being casted here due to a different light source. So applying that to the web, um, this really depends on you, but most of the time, I imagine there are two light sources here. The first light source is going to be coming from the top of your browser, going down, and the other light source is the um, ambient light source, which is in front of the user towards the interface. So there are two shadows here, one being casted from the top to the bottom, and here from the front to the back of the widget. So applying those here in this layout, and boom, not too much, it's not too harsh, and it looks all right. So yeah, that's how you create good looking shadows. All right. So tip number 9, create depth using colors. So a lot of you might think that, all right, so I was able to create depth because of the shadow, right? Which is good. Um, but aside from the shadow, you can actually also manipulate the colors here. So you can see I'm using almost the same gray here. That's why the shadow isn't casted very well. Like the element doesn't look too in front of me. And one of the things that I usually do, especially when I'm starting out in a project, is I usually set up like 10 different grays um, or 10 different hues for the primary color. And that would just allow me to just cut all the decision making. Like I can't spend a lot of my day like hovering around the color wheel because it's such a um non-productive way to spend my time choosing colors. So you have to choose your colors ahead. And if you're having troubles trying to create your own color palette, um, there are some existing ones that you can use. Um, I would admit, like having an eye for color takes a little bit of time and practice to develop that eye. But if you're in a bit of a hurry, you can use existing ones. This is an example from Tailwind. You can just immediately use. And when you're confident enough, you can just make your own color scheme. So this is me making up my own color scheme. This is actually a parametric color mixer, and you can check out the URL here, colormixer.web.app. And basically what you can do is just add different shades of colors, and then you can control the intensity. So you can see here, I'm using black here as a base color, and I'm trying to integrate it with this blue hue. And this is the results that I was able to get by adjusting like the position, the impact, the range, even the blend mode. So if you're feeling a little bit adventurous, this is a really good way to quickly generate color palettes. All right, so applying um, a different a different background color here. So you might not notice it, but it's super subtle. Suddenly, because I applied a darker bluish gray here on the background, it pushes this widget on front compared to this one. And you can also see like the rectangle boxes here, they're being pushed in front as well compared to this one. So this is how you utilize like color to create contrast. All right. So my last tip, I think this is my last tip. So use fewer borders. So like I said, um, I try to stay away from making everything looking so boxy. I want everything to be much more fluid. So this doesn't necessarily need to be a box. I think I can rearrange this content into a section of its own. So here's what I came up with. And then we still have these feature components here. I think I can also improve them. There you go. So some icons, some heading, and some body text below. So you can see like how like being less blocky would make the layout much more continuous and easier to consume. So all right, tip number 11, use white space. So I think I mentioned this earlier. Um, this looks a bit too cramped for me. We need to add some white space to allow the layout to breathe. Don't worry, people will always scroll. Um, the concept of the fold is an age-old concept from print design, and you know the first web designers were print designers, which is why a lot of the um, principles in designing for the web was earlier taken from print, and eventually the web matured. It's its own medium, so principles changed as well. So let's add some white space here, allowing it to breathe. So you can see here, I also fixed the shadow because the shadow here is too strong. I'm a bit confused of the light source as well. And there are some missing links, images. I think downloading the mobile app is a good call to action. It's a main call to action for this one. So I just decided, all right, let's make this to a section. So I added a section for the mobile app, making people to download so they can actually book their flights there. And I think I also see some payment gateways here, and I think that's important as well to showcase, like so people understand like what are the available payment options so I can book a flight. So I decided, all right, let's add a section for it as well. Give it some space to breathe. And I don't want it to grab too much attention. It's too colorful. So I just unsaturated it. So we have this section as well. Let's just rearrange this. There we go. And yeah, I think this is my last tip. Use good typefaces. So, I actually have a list here. You can print screen it if you like. If you don't want to take too much on what typeface or typeface combination to use for your headings. There's some decent typefaces that I like. For body text or articles, these are some really good ones. And how do I know what is a good heading text typeface and a good body typeface? A lot of it has to do with their X height. If you're familiar with typography, it's like the height of from the base into the topmost portion of lowercase letters like A or C, and that's actually something that would make a very good body text typeface. So here's a good list. For dashboards, these are more focused on being data driven. Can use this as well. These are very good ones that I use for admin panels. So yeah, so I think this is just showing you like that my thought process on applying these different principles into an existing site. So I think currently the typeface being used here is Roboto, and I'm trying to apply, I think, Inter UI. I'm applying Inter UI here, and mainly because I like the more rounded feel of it. As you can see it here. So it feels much more better than this one because this one feels a bit cramped up. So yeah, allows it to breathe. And that's the result of the principles being applied. So we went from this one to this one. That's how we redesigned this existing site, applying those 12 simple principles and putting them in action. So hopefully you were able to learn like how my thought process works on applying those tips and tricks. So hopefully you can also cheat in your design. So in summary, use good photos. You don't have to fill up the whole screen. Give text consistent contrast. Establish a type scale. Supercharge defaults, especially input fields. Have a spacing system. Overlap elements to create layers. Use shadow. Make use of the ambient and the direct light for the shadowing. Create depth using colors. You can create depth not just using shadows, but or elevations, or I mean overlapping elements. You can also use colors to create depth. Use fewer borders. Everything doesn't have to be a rectangle. Use white space, a good amount of it, and good typefaces for the specific purpose that you want to use it for. So yeah, if you want to learn more, here are very good resources that based a lot of the tips and tricks that I shared earlier. You can screenshot and visit this site later on. And yeah, I think that's it for me. So thank you guys. Thanks for listening.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Francis. That was actually pretty cool. I didn't know the shadows really play a part into that it will make such a difference in the UI actually.
Yeah.
And I saw use bad boy fonts in the slide.
Yeah.
That was actually
Yeah.
really cool. I've actually had a little session yesterday with my professor, and there's also a few tips that he gave me. The acronym is called KISS. Keep it simple and
simple.
stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of
Anyways,
the
Yeah.
Yeah, like a lot of people try to overcomplicate like the interface. Like one of the tips that I can share is try not to think of different functionalities at first. Just focus on what you're trying to achieve, and then eventually you're gonna build on top of it.
Mm. That's pretty interesting. I've never thought that UI could be really, really so important that, you know, it's something that you don't notice, but it actually plays a part in
Yeah,
all
the
the
devil
general
is in
stuff
the
that you do. Yeah.
yeah, it's in the details really.
Okay, so we have a question
Hmm.
from one of the audience. What if
Hmm.
I have so many options that I need to put in, but then it will look super, super messy? What do you think about
Right,
that?
right. So I'm just trying to like understand the question better. So
Mm,
how what if I have so many options? I'm not sure what options exactly are you referring to, but maybe there are a lot of features perhaps that you want to put to, and it's gonna look extremely messy. I think, just basing from the question,
mm,
and what you can actually do is to prioritize things, prioritize features. Not everything has to be there at a
mm,
specific touch point. You need to learn to prioritize. For instance, if you have different features for the specific app, um, most likely you're not going to need all of those features to be in front of the user. You can take them through a journey, through an onboarding, if they are accessed in some specific way. So that's one way. So you don't have to make it like super, you don't have to make it look super messy for the sake of needing to put these different features or options on the current screen.
mm. Okay. We have
Are
another
there?
questions. It says, "Are there any other websites to design my UI besides besides the websites that you just said,
All
or
right.
do you just?"
So yeah. So
Yeah.
I think they're probably referring to an app. So primarily, I actually was able to reach the point when we were designing interfaces in Photoshop. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was the standard way back, and just thinking about it, was a pain, especially when you need
Yeah.
to support Retina. But
Mm,
and today there are a lot of tools that you can use. There is Adobe XD, there is Sketch, there is also Figma. Um, I would recommend you to choose any between those three. Anyways, the learning curve isn't really much, and there isn't a lot of difference between the three in terms of using the tool. It will be super familiar for you. It's not like the learning curve from learning from Photoshop to Sketch, which was super different.
mm,
Um, if you're trying to design a site using a site or a service, there are a lot of good tools out there. If you're into no code, you can probably use Webflow. I think they
mm.
also have pre-existing templates. You can use Squarespace. You can use forgot the other one, but there are a lot of tools out there. Depending on how much fidelity or how much control you need to have in designing your interface, that you can use today. So
Mm.
yeah.
Then from that question, which one do you think is the easiest to get into?
The easiest. I think in my experience, it really depends on where you're coming from. So if it's your first time and you haven't touched any design tool yet, you've been using Canva as a design tool, I think the friction or the learning curve, it's a bit steeper compared to if you're already well versed coming from Photoshop and moving to XD, right?
Mm,
But I think that's very subjective. Which one is easiest to use?
mm-hmm,
I wouldn't be too worried on which one. Um, However, I have my bias a little bit on Figma, mainly because it's cross-platform and works in the browser,
mm,
and I work with a lot of different people with different machines. They're on Linux, they're on Windows. Previously, I worked in an agency wherein we all have Mac OS as our daily driver. So I was fortunate to use Sketch with everyone. And if I was to use to like suggest a tool, I'll definitely just choose Figma for now, and it's gonna change. A lot of these tools are gonna change. So yeah.
All right. And I have one more question actually. Actually, I think you answered this in the question just now. Do you think getting someone's template would help in designing my UI? You think like that's a good idea to like a starting off point?
All right. So it depends on your goal. There are some different design problems that requires like a specific design solution, and using a pre-built template or a pre-built solution doesn't necessarily help you solve that. In fact, it might be detrimental. But if you're trying to learn like how this interfaces look so good, when you're trying to reverse engineer things, that is actually the value that you're getting from using these templates. So I would encourage you actually to learn. If you want to learn, just look for a site you really like. Get some sites in Dribble, reverse engineer it. But of course, don't post it and claim it as your own, but use it for practice. If you're using a free template, as long as it actually solves, I mean, you customize it a bit, because rarely you find an existing template that solves your needs, right? And your goals and the objectives and problems. So use it as a boilerplate or as a base point and customize it as you go along. So yeah, definitely using some template would help.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Francis, for today's speech. Yeah, and I'll see you next time.
No worries. Thanks for the invite, Enver.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Oh, we actually have
not
one more
more.
question, I think.
All right, let's do this.
How do you usually deal with stakeholders or clients not accepting your UI proposal?
Oh my God, I love these questions. Right. So I think in my experience, when you've come to a point wherein there is some friction between the stakeholders or your clients not accepting your UI proposal, there is a lot of misalignment you haven't done in the beginning. You can't just step into a meeting and do a kickoff and like, all right, this is what you want, this is what you need. Yeah, we want something like Grab, we want something like this, guys. And like, okay. And then you go back to your room or in your office and do the work for a whole month, not talk to everybody, and basically work in a silo. That's just the wrong way to do work. So what you have to do is to actually make the stakeholders or your clients part of your design process. It's your job as a designer to educate your clients and your stakeholders on why you're making these design decisions. You need to make it more transparent to them. So be more objective. Don't be too much of like artsy kind of guy trying to, because you're solving a problem. You're not making art here, all right? So define the objectives, define the goals, and make sure every design decision you have in your interface is aligned with that, and make sure your stakeholders are also aware of that. So by having by working that way, you reduce the like, them rejecting whatever it is that you're making.
Okay, we have another question again. Yeah.
All right.
I hope I won't be considered as presumptuous, but what if we are colorblind? Oh, this is interesting. Yeah.
That's all right. I don't consider you presumptuous. In fact, this is actually really important. So I've worked with startups, and it's different set of goals. Basically, they just want to launch a product because runway is too short. But in bigger organizations, wherein you have digital platforms affecting people by the millions, inclusivity is something that you really have to consider, and especially for the colorblind, and accessibility. And there are a lot of great tools out there. I think in Figma, there's actually a tool that would rate the accessibility, like the colors that I'm using. That is something that you can use. In fact, we've actually worked on a project like it's related to healthcare, and those are one of the business goals we have, that we need to be accessible. So um, it really I mean, I would definitely. I mean, in a perfect world, when you have all the resources, and all the money, and all the time, of course, you want to add, to make it accessible. And um, depending on the scale and the size of what you're building, it might not be a priority for now. But once you reach to that scale, it will become very important. So yes, that is something that has to be considered.
Hmm. Do we have any other more questions? Same a question also applies to if were not colorblind. How do we make sure that the colors are appealing to a colorblind person?
Oh,
Whoa.
so this is actually good because I remembered there are some different types of color blindness. And like, for instance, we use states, like colors for different states, like success is green, um, something negative or error is red, like universally accepted concepts. But this looks different for blind people. There is actually a plugin or tool that helps you with this. I just forgot the name, but um, there are some alternative colors that are not really colorblind safe, I would say, but would appeal to this colorblind people. But of course, you also need like to check out your data, check out the demographics. Are these the kind of people who are using it? So that's one factor to that you need
Hmm.
to consider.
Hmm. Do you think consistent font usage is important? Like, for example, a site, if they're using Times New Roman, they should use Times New Roman for the whole site and not use any other fonts. This is
All
a
right.
really specific question. Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe the developer probably forced this guy to use Times New Roman. Anyways, yeah. So I wouldn't say it's not a strict rule. Um, Perhaps in print, I mean the most, even in print design, like the most number of typefaces that you can use probably two. If you're using, like, it's a rule of thumb. It's not a rule. It's a guideline. If you're using more than two, you probably know what you're doing.
Mm,
And if you're a beginner, you're just starting out, it's a good rule to follow, or guideline rather, to just stick to a singular interface. But a single interface, I mean, a single typeface with huge variety of type typeface weights, font weights
mm,
rather, and this would allow you enough flexibility to create contrast with just a single type of typeface.
mm,
The most that I see sometimes, we usually stick to two. We have like a body typeface, and then we have a heading typeface, and usually that's just it. So yeah.
mm. Oh,
All right.
there's another
Okay, we
question.
have right.
With the
Hi, Mr.
growth of
Francis.
artificial design intelligence, how are they influencing the way designers are designing the website?
Right. I actually like this question because there are a lot of tools, like for instance, like Webflow, and a lot of my front end friends who purely, the purest front end who do HTML,
Mm-hmm.
CSS, and JS, not the others at spectrum of front end wherein you do React and JavaScript.
Yeah.
So they are worried that with the rise of artificial intelligence and these tools, we would be out of a job. Like we see AI creating landing pages, right? We see
Mm-hmm.
AI creating music or designing posters or whatnot. And there's going to be a lot of impact, but that doesn't mean you're going to be out of the job or it's not worth learning. It just means that these tools enable us to think of the bigger picture. Instead of focusing too much effort on pushing the pixels, we can ask AI or machine learning to do that for us and actually think of the bigger things. Think of how the user journey looks like. Think more of how this would have a business impact, how usability would look like, instead of worrying too much on pixel pushing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of, there are actually startups wherein you just write some wireframes, draw wireframes on a whiteboard, and and then immediately they can create like a layout out of it. So it's interesting, and it should be something that we should embrace and look forward, and not something that we should be worried of as designers, like we're gonna get out of a job. It just means the role of a designer evolves. It's not anymore limited to pixel pushing. So yeah.
I see. I wonder if there's any more questions. I don't think there's any more questions. I found your speech really, really interesting, especially the questions. The questions were quite interesting as well. Yeah. All right. So thank you so much. And I'll see you soon.
No worries. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. All right. So now we'll move on to the next speaker. So the second speaker we have is Mr. Joshua de Guzman, and he is a software engineer based in the Philippines. And he's a Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart. He's also a software engineer for Better Financial. He's also worked as a software engineer at freelancer.com, and he held several key responsibilities in his conditions. And then most of the projects that he worked on, he took ownership and worked on very many different product groups, especially mobile, local jobs, Freelancer, discovery, and helped bring a better experience to over 5 million users on mobile globally. So let's put our hands together to welcome Mr. Joshua. Hey, Mr. Joshua.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hey.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
What's up?
Great. Yeah, I've been watching you guys. The question in the Q&A, especially the presentation of Francis, is actually interesting. Like, I actually learned a lot from you, Francis. I think you're there on the backstage.
Yeah, that was pretty cool, actually. I'm actually looking very forward to what you share for Flutter.
Sure thing.
Yeah, because Flutter seems like a actually really cool toolkit they can use. Yeah, I actually want to learn more about it. Right, the stage is now yours.
Okay. Yeah, I think. Okay. Great. I'll just double check. Okay, StreamYard it's a lot. Okay. Great. Oh, my messenger is opened. Great. Great. Before we start, hopefully you guys are still awake. I think we live in the same time zone. It's almost 9, but hopefully you guys we're as excited as you were initially. Like I was actually excited for the talk of Francis before me, so I actually watched it, and hopefully you guys feel the same. And thank you, for staying and continuing watching DSC's technical workshop for tonight. And to start off, the context of this talk is more on understanding Flutter in terms of like building UI. So it's almost similar to what Francis told you about earlier, but right now we're doing it in Flutter code. Oh, great. Flutter. Flutter is a UI toolkit. With Flutter, creating applications, it's far more faster than doing it like, for example, like years ago. Like it's a UI toolkit that allows you to build high quality apps within a shorter period of time, and pretty much you can deploy it to multiple platforms, such as for mobile, whether it's Android or iOS. But again, it's like Flutter. It's not only for for mobile. With the latest news coming from the Flutter Engage that we had last March 3, you can also deploy Flutter apps to the web, and optional toggle or mode for optional flag for the desktop applications for Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. But today, we'll just try to create an app in the context of mobile. Otherwise, we'll be spending the rest of the night learning what Flutter is if we try to try to configure the presentation to accommodate all the platforms. Today, let's just focus on mobile. With Flutter, you own every screen. So, for example, if you want to align a specific widget on the top left corner or the bottom right corner, you can control it using the positional widgets. At the same time, the design language for Flutter, there's no restriction. The way you add widgets, or what we consider components, for example, a button, a container, which is the thing that is almost similar to a div in HTML. So hopefully, you guys had some background or some experience with other programming languages, but it's not required. Now, like with Flutter, even if you don't have like in-depth programming experience with the things that we'll be doing today, hopefully, you'll be able to create even the most simple app possible that we will try to attempt to do today or tonight. So with Flutter, it follows a declarative UI approach in terms of like building the UIs or building the structure or the layout of your screens. So given here in front of you is an example of a declarative layout in Flutter. So a declarative layout, if you try to think of it, it's kind of like a way for us to be able to design an app that is straightforward. So when I add a text or a list of text that I want to align vertically, I want Flutter to render it the way I added the widgets. So for example, I added a text widget with strawberry pavlova text and another description behind the containing layout. I know that the output of the code is rendered the way I added the text. So that's declarative. There's no design language in between. Like you don't have to bind an XML to a code. You don't have to bind a storyboard to views to components like we previously do on iOS. It's kind of like a pain not to work on, especially the constraints. But with Flutter, you'll just have to add these containers or these widgets inside your layout, and since it's declarative, it will lay out or it will render your apps the way you add your code. Later, we'll see it in action so that you'll experience how to build an actual Flutter app. So we also have this concept of Flutter in like nested widgets. So later you'll see in code that a lot of the things that we'll be adding, like especially the more components, more controls, you will see a lot of nested widgets in the code. So we have here, for example, as a parent, a scaffold widget. We also have a center, and we have here a column. So the center accepts a single child. So as a single child, like you can only attach one component. But for a column, which is used for layouting components vertically, it can accept multiple widgets, meaning you can add more than one text widget here or other type of widgets inside the column, because this is how you would typically place them in Flutter code. So again, this is this concept of nested widgets for building UIs. Another concept of building UIs in Flutter is the way you customize it. So with Flutter, it provides you a rich set of widgets. It has a Cupertino package, and it also has a material package in which they all expose properties. And the properties is used for modifying either the color, modifying the padding. Later we'll see it, like how Flutter actually renders these changes in real time. And also, at the same time, for the text, like not only for the parameters, but also for the text, you would expect that you should be able to change the style. Otherwise, all of our apps would look the same, right? Like, so with the text, there's this special parameter called style, in which it allows you to change the font size, the text color, and more. But if the widgets that came right out of the box from Flutter is not enough to meet your design specs, like what Francis told earlier, we may have different, may have different configurations on the design depending on the device you're targeting, whether it's a website or an app. For this one, like you can create custom widgets. So we have two types of widgets that you would normally like use in terms of like creating these custom widgets. So it's either a stateless or a stateful widget. So with the stateless widgets, yeah, it's very straightforward. It will not contain any state changes during runtime. So meaning if you have a text, you have passed on a just a text value and you don't expect to change it during runtime, then that can be considered as a stateless widget. But for more complex widgets like screens, like buttons, like a counter or a slider, especially for progress indicator, then for those kind of widgets, you may want to use a stateful widget in which it can contain its own state object, and you can contain, like for example, variables. You can store numbers, strings that can change during runtime. Now, I'm mentioning a lot of runtime or during runtime. Runtime meaning like if the user already installs the app and is already using your app, meaning your app is dynamic, your app is interactive, you would probably opt in to create screens that are using stateful widget. And the other benefit of like in Flutter, in terms of like creating beautiful UIs, you're not only like with your custom UIs, you can reuse these components to the multiple parts of your app. So for example, if you have created this custom box widget, you can also use this or call them again inside, for example, a layout widget that I've mentioned earlier, which is a column, and it aligns the widgets vertically. And with this, it pretty much reduces the boilerplate. It reduces the boilerplate that you would typically have to add. So for example, if I'm not using a custom widget, I would have to add a center widget and have to add it here. I have to add it at the bottom of the size box again. So basically, with with the custom widget, you can reuse it for most part of the app, especially if you are following a design spec. So for example, if you want this button to have this certain configuration by default, you can use it without actually changing it, and you can use it on multiple parts of the app by just by just calling the class, and it's kind of like you are instantiating a widget and adding it in a layout group widget or in your widget group. Another benefit that I mentioned earlier, like with Flutter, it's a UI toolkit that allows you to deploy on multiple platforms. And since it has a feature of doing that, you will just have to work on pretty much a single repository, whatever version control you're using. And you can deploy to these to platforms such as Android or iOS. And one of the benefits of that is, from experience, is that especially if you're a solo developer, you had probably experienced, or you will experience a lot of issues on the layout. So for example, if you are working on an Android app and you wanted to work on devices like tablets, like a larger Android smartphone or a smaller Android smartphone, you will have to deal with a lot of Android specific layout configuration. So meaning all of those changes, you will have to do it again for iOS. So meaning if you do it for iOS, you will now have to learn a different language, which is also not stored on a different repository. You'll track different issues here because you will now have to work with storyboards, with constraints, with different set of devices like iPhones, like iPads. But again, like Flutter, using Flutter or using native Android or iOS, there's no way comparing which is the best. It's just really a matter of preference. But I'm just giving you some experience that I had with dealing with, especially with releasing to a million of users. Like there's a vast amount of screen device that you can imagine. Like we support most of them, but we still have a lot of layout issues to maintain in the long run. And what's better with Flutter is that, like as mentioned earlier, with Flutter Engage last March 3, Flutter for Web is now supported in a stable channel of the Flutter SDK. And you can now deploy and work on a lot of new features and cool updates from the SDK, including PWA support and stable desktop accessibility. So desktop accessibility is one of my favorite changes, at least for these Flutter stable support for the Flutter 2.0. And there's a lot more for you to explore. But right now, let's just try to start small and try to build a mobile app. Otherwise, there will be a lot of exciting things to discuss on this one. Deploy to stable Android, iOS, and web, an optional flag for stable mode for you to test out your apps on Linux, macOS, and Windows. So these are all native. So basically, if we're referring to like Android, iOS, or Linux, macOS, we're referring to native apps. So even though you have a web app that can be accessed to Linux, macOS, or Windows, still have a different performance gain in terms of like using a native app for these desktop platforms. Last but not least is with Flutter. It allows you to stay productive and allows you to build fast. Later we'll see it like in action, the hot reload feature of Flutter. So this one, every time you try to change something, it should reflect the changes sub-second, like probably 200 to 750 millisecond, and you should be able to reflect the changes without waiting for 2 to 3 minutes now of your time wasted on waiting. So this one happening on sub-second. Okay, that's about it in Flutter. I mean, it's okay to understand those concepts, like the benefits of Flutter. What can I do with Flutter? What platforms can I use with Flutter? But I guess it's best to learn Flutter if you actually write apps on top of it. Now, before we start, I would like you guys to try out first Dartpad. So Dartpad is a web application or code editor that you can access on the web, and it pretty much allows you to edit applications. Okay, edit applications, and it's as if you are running a real Flutter app. So this is the counter app. Let's try to run it. Okay, I think so this is a web app. You can visit it on your website. Either, at least for our region, I mostly use dartpad.cn. It's a website that is hosted near our region, but on some cases you can also use Dartpad since that's the official website. Let's try to load this. We can reset. Maybe there's something added to the code. Okay. And it's not. Again, let me just reload this again. Maybe let's just clear it. Okay, dartpad.cn. Okay. So I think this is just internet, but in Singapore, I believe you have way faster internet in your area. So this is the Dart programming language. So the good thing about Flutter is that you don't necessarily have to study Dart in depth before you even try and start Flutter, unlike JavaScript, in which there's a lot of quirks, especially it's not a type language. But with Flutter, you can actually learn Dart along the way. And if we try to open the counter app, this is the source code. You will also see it on our code editor in a few. And okay, I think there's an error. Maybe I reached my limit, but you can actually do it on your. I think you can actually run it on your own. Maybe I reached my limit while testing Dartpad. But yeah, you can test it. Dartpad.dev, Dartpad.cn. it's almost similar to what we're doing in a few. And before we start, like one of the things that you need to consider is to install the Flutter SDK. So this is the link. I'll just send you guys like the slides and provide you the links. It's flutter.dev, and you also have to have code editors. So this is where you would edit the code changes for your app, not unless you are very well versed with the CLI or using Vim. I mean, that's also possible. I tried it once, but the plugins, no, it's not that. It's really difficult to wire things up at the moment. And you either have to download an emulator or connect a real device. So right now I'm using an actual iOS device. So you can see here, there's some notifications there. Just clear it up. Okay, the notification's clear. So I'm using a real device here. And some of the basic commands that you have to understand before we even start doing the live coding. So the first one is Flutter Doctor. So the Flutter Doctor, it's a way for you to be able to diagnose like what a typical diagnose and evaluate whether your Flutter installation is up to date, whether you are missing something in your installation. And Flutter Create, it's straightforward. It's a command that allows you to create a new Flutter project. And Flutter Run will be able to run your app. Right now, I'm running it on a real device. Okay, we still have a couple minutes. In Flutter, like we are able to, we mentioned that we are able to build fast applications. But let's see, if we can actually build a simple and a Spotify inspired application within, say, 10 minutes or 5 minutes. I'm not sure how long it will take, but I assure you we can finish it tonight. It's not like 12 a.m. or something, but let's see. See if we can run it on iOS for the meantime. Okay, going to the code editor. So I assume most of you have already probably tried creating a Flutter project, but just as a precaution, I already created a Flutter project. Sometimes it's really slow if you're doing the live stream, but this is the command, Flutter create. This is just an optional one. I recommend adding the org if you don't want to edit it in the future. Like, for example, the default is com.example. For this one, I can just pretty much, I add my own domain and the project name. And this is pretty much the output of the code, of the command, basically. Great. Not sure where am I looking. Okay. Great. So for this one, I only have to tell you 4 things about this code structure, then we can start coding. So the first one is Android. So initially, if you're not dealing with such complex apps, most of the time you will not have to deal with these directory. But in the future, if you want to install some directories and they require to add Android specific code, especially in Gradle or Kotlin, you'll have to modify it here. For iOS, if you are tests, especially if you're using a package or following a complex tutorial, this is where you would change it, the Swift file, the CocoaPod dependencies that you have to configure. But right now, that's not our goal. I'm just giving you some hints where you can look at, especially if you're required by the package. And we also have PubSpec. Great. So PubSpec, think of it as, there's a lot of comments here, but think of the PubSpec as a single source of truth, as a manifest of what your Flutter app is. So in this Flutter app, I know that this is, there's a description, there's a name. I know easily what this app is supposed to do. Next one is you can also define the version of the app here. Typically, you would have to reduce it to 0.0.1, and The next thing that you can do in a pubspec.yaml file is to add dependencies. So dependencies, later we'll see it, how we can add dependencies. Since we're not building the audio player from scratch, we'll be using a package for that. And also the assets. You can uncomment it here. And the last file that I want you to look at if you have finished creating a new Flutter project is the main.dart file. So for the main.dart file, this is the entry point of your Flutter app. So it has the main functions. If you're familiar with Java, it's almost similar to the void main function, which is also the entry point in which there's also arguments that you can pass. This is similar to Flutter. And with the run-up function under the Flutter SDK, it renders all of the widgets of your app. So right now, for most cases, you will not touch this, especially if you're just building a simple app, or even if you're not dealing with a complex package. Okay, going back to our goal, it's just a simple music player. What are the parts of music player? So we have photo album, we have the title, we also have the seek bar, and we also have the play and pause. And last but not the least is the actual music that we want to play. Otherwise, we're not building a music player without playing anything, right? So let's try it. Let's try opening. Let me just open pub.dev. Okay, let's open pub.dev. Oh, it's loading. So again, our goal here is to play a song. So let's start with downloading a dependency that allows us to download a song. Oops, wrong websites. Let's see. Oops, I think I have to change this from. Great. So I'm looking for, or at least we're looking for, an audio player. Let's see if we can find any package. I actually have a preference already. I'm just showing you the interface. This is pub.dev. So it's a package dependency hosting site repository for Flutter and Dart. And with a dependency or a package, it's already built for you. You just have to integrate it. But for most part, some of them may work, but some of them may not. So you just have to be careful which package you have to look for. At least for this one, I already tested it. So this is how I copy a dependency. Next is I import it on pubspec. So we started at around 850. So let's say 850. So let's just under 5. This is the first change that we'll add to the code. This is the first change. Okay. Okay, it's still running. So the dependency is currently being downloaded on my local machine, and it's currently being downloaded or cached on the Flutter SDK path. As you install it, you will find where your Flutter was installed. So right now, it's installed. I refresh it, nothing's happening. The next thing is we have to copy this one. I think we can just do that one. Just copy. Okay. What I'll do here is I can, instead of copying it, maybe we can just. So I'm just editing a main.dart file. Let's not try to complicate things and create new files. So right now I'm just editing this one. So if you try to look at it, the counter is updating since this is a stateful widget. This is a stateful widget, the homepage app. So there's a counter variable. So every time I try to change it, it reflects the changes every time we try to press set state or call set state. So the first thing is declaring a class of audio player or a variable audio player. So that's the first step. Maybe you're missing something. Okay, let's maybe maybe it's not yet there. Let's try to see. Let's try. It's not identified by my IDE or a code editor. I'm using Visual Studio, by the way. So for some reason, try again. Let's try to install. Maybe, or if I just reference the path, let's see. Okay, it's not there. Let's try to download the dependency again. Maybe there was some issue with my extension. Okay. It's running. Okay, there's the chat. Okay, right to leg, thanks, Francis. Okay, it did install, but let's see if we can import it now. Oh, it's not yet here. Maybe I should quit the code editor. That's how I would normally verify it. Code. I'll open the Okay, so right now it's opening the code. So this only happens if you're doing stream, but definitely not going to happen if okay, it's actually there. The next thing we have to do now is to just run the code, but that can wait. We can start modifying the code while waiting. Okay, do code. Okay, let me just open. Okay, it's already 5 minutes. I guess we're there. Okay, not sure why it's not installed, but okay, great. Maybe there was an issue with. Good thing I have a backup plan. Let's see. Let's try not to. Okay. Let's try to download the dependency once again. Otherwise, I also have a backup code here. So, just to be ready, we should always prepare everything. I think this happens. I think the internet's not able to cache the dependency properly. Okay, I have a backup project here, which has the dependency installed. Let's see whoever wins or runs first. Okay. And yeah, for some reason it's not running. Let's just use the existing code that I have for building the music app, and so let's not waste waiting time here. But again, what we did initially is we added the dependency. So very much this is just the like the same step. Just added a dependency. We've added the audio player. We've added the audio player, and we instantiated the audio player. So this is the audio player, meaning like if the init state is called every time you open a new widget, a stateful widget. So for this stateful widget, this is a screen, meaning every time I try to open this home screen, I will call this method asset audio player dot new player, meaning I'm creating an instance of that object in which we added on the asset audio player variable. And we have these are all provided. These are all provided on the documentation of the package that we're using. And this is how you would normally define a method in Flutter. So just have to create or dart void play, meaning every time I try to call this method play, I will have to play a local file. So the local file is stored on the assets folder, in which it has a sample music from an artist named Ben Platt. Not sure if you guys are a fan of him in Singapore, but yeah, it's still loading. Hopefully it will be up in a few. But I'm just running you through the code changes that I've made earlier before the stop, because yeah, there's been some. I think my internet's a bit slow. I cannot, for some reason, download the dependency at the moment, and maybe some caching issue. But at least those are only the changes for the package. So we just instantiated it, we initialized it, and we control it whether it's going play or going to stop. So it's now compiling. Hopefully this will show us the output app. And later I'll try to walk you through the code. Great. Oh, it's already 9. So it's less than 10. Okay. I'm not sure if I can touch. Okay, I can reach him. Okay, it's compiling. Let's wait a couple of minutes. So every time you first try to run a Flutter app, this probably will take 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the load of your CPU or the capacity of your memory. There are a lot of factors that plays in part in the hardware, but oftentimes, if you're not doing this streaming or you're not doing anything else, like it will be probably less than a couple of minutes. And at least after the first run, subsequent builds should be a lot faster after this. Okay, we're still doing it. Yeah, we can start with the Q&A if you have any questions. Okay, it's running Flutter app. Okay. We're We'll try to change something so you can actually experience what it feels like to see some changes in real time. Come on. Hopefully it's running. Let's see. Let's go build done. Hey. Oh, yes. Installing and launching. So I guess while waiting, now maybe you can send some of your questions. Other than that, at least for iOS, if you want to build apps for iOS, you should have a Mac OS platform to build for you to be able to build iOS apps. So Mac OS, it's only available for MacBook, Mac Minis, and iMacs. But again, if you just want to start with Flutter and you only have Windows laptop or Linux laptop, it's also possible. Like Flutter can also be built on those platforms. Although, like if you want to do development or deployment, you should either procure or rent a Mac in the cloud, because you will not be able to build or prepare your app for deployment if you're on Linux or Windows, if you're targeting iOS. Okay, so this is the sample app that we're trying to achieve if we have more time. But yeah, this is very straightforward. Like what it does is it just prints out things. Not sure if I can share you the song. Let's try to change the speakers to okay. Oh, let's try to change the speaker to MacBook. Okay, it's changed to MacBook. So hopefully this will be captured. Hopefully this will be captured by this will be captured by the MacBook. Okay. Okay, right now we're not able to hear it because oops. Why is that? It changed. Oh, it's a recording. Sorry. It's a recording. So let's try to go back to okay, so I guess yeah, I think we can still play it even if we're not doing the changes anymore. So I just have to open QuickTime. So QuickTime is what allows me to do the screencast on your end. So I'll just share with you the source code. It's easy, the organizer, so that they can share with you guys respectively. Okay, let's try. I think we can actually play. Okay. I think you're right. So I think we won't be able to hear it, at least from here. But yeah, like at least for this one, the changes that we did here was to add these components or the widgets. So right now the phone was disconnected for some reason. Like I think there was issue with the code or with the cable, but like the gist of here is that like for the background, what we did is we made it transparent so that we can customize it because it's useless even if we try to add white background. What we did is we use a stack widget. So I just tried to run it. So a stack widget is what allows us to place widgets on top of each other. So for example, we have a couple of elements here. We have the background, which is a gradient. It falls, it hides behind these widgets. There's a image, there's a control, and this gradient is almost similar on how you would normally think of a gradient would function on design spec, or especially on Figma. They have this specific set of colors that you would use for gradient. Okay, I think there's a question. What are some pros of Flutter? And name some cons of Flutter. So, great. While waiting for the app to run, I think we can answer this one. So this is probably, I'll answer this in two parts. So probably, at least for the first one, pros of Flutter, sometimes it's really subjective, to identify things, whether they are actually pros or things that can actually be considered as cons. So at least for the pros, what are the benefits that you'll get from Flutter? Definitely, if you're a startup, if you're a small company, ideally, you will have to, you'll probably have to save twice on the development cost of engineering if you're using Flutter. But again, this is depending again on what project. Depending on what project you're trying to build, whether it's a low code embedded hardware in which Flutter can also be used, but maybe there are other good alternatives for that one. This all comes down on a matter of preference, how you would consider the benefits or the negatives of using Flutter. But if I try to think of it, at least for the pros, it allows the businesses, especially startups, to save twice the development costs. For the cons, it allows one of the thing is your developers would have to learn a new language, which is Dart, especially if you already have teams of iOS and Android developer. You will have to learn a completely new language. But again, as mentioned earlier, language is not a barrier here. If you're already doing Flutter along the way, you should be able to learn Dart as you go and deep dive to building complex Flutter apps. And also, like in terms of like Android versus Flutter, Android, you can never go wrong with native. As far as you can see it, like it's closer to the native APIs. Flutter is, it's basically communicating with the native APIs through a series of platform channels. But again, Flutter works great. Like if you try to think of it, like there's a lot of apps, there are a lot of companies already that ship millions of downloads to the users and haven't received some complaints on this one. So could you explain more examples when to use stateful and stateless widget? Sure, we can. I think it's already running, so I think we can use this as an example. So that's a very timely example. So for this one, we have this widgets, like grow as we go, which is the title of the song. And if we try to remove, or add here a text, I added here 1. If I try to reload it, it should reflect the changes right away. So if I try to save it. Okay. Let's try to, I think this is the recording. Let's try to open a new recording. Okay. Okay, so this is the 1. And if I try to add more 2. So before we answer your question, let's try to do the hot reload. Oh, it's already lost again. For some reason. Yeah, it got lost again. But yeah, like going back to your question, like these can be considered as a stateless widget. So a stateless widget, so typically you don't want to have a lot of nested widgets here. So what you will do is you will either have to extract the widget. So at the back of my head, I want to extract this widget as the title widget, since like it doesn't it just displays the title, but it does not contain any state changes. So basically I will use stateless widget for that one. So let's try to use create a custom widget on this one. Oh, it's Duolingo time, so I have 24 days straight on that one. Title widget. The widget is optional. Like you can basically name anything you like for the widget. For the widget, like for the widget extend, so this should be extend. So again, between a stateful and stateless widget, you will just have to think whether a widget will contain runtime state changes. So in this one, the title widget will just display the title basically, and it will not contain changes within this code. So for example, this title widget is just a way for me to display a text, and then I can consider this as a stateless widget. And to change the value, you have to expose a parameter. For exposing a parameter, you can do something like final string title. Then you can call it, it's slow. Let's try to copy it first for the meantime. And I am creating a constructor. So if you're familiar with Java, this should be like almost similar. This exposes a name parameter for this widget. And again, the stateless widget does not contain any changes within its own class. No, like just have to remember that it's not containing any runtime changes within its own class. So if you try to think of it, the title widget only changes based on this title. So meaning there is an external widget that is calling this title widget, in which that contains the responsibility of whatever value of the title is. So for example, if going back to the previous place of the title, we should see it here that we can add title widget. And that's a stateless widget. Okay. And for the stateful widget, let's just add the title. For the stateful widget, no, we just discussed stateless. For the stateful widget, it's just the opposite. No, like it just contains some values that change during runtime. So for example, we have these two values. We have is playing, and we have the seek value. So you can imagine that this homepage allows you to, like, is interactive. It allows you to, like, reflect the changes that you made or the user made in your app. So for example, a user tries to drag this slider. Then it's interactive in a way that the seek value is changing during runtime. So this homepage contains the responsibility of storing the value, storing the seek value, meaning whatever timestamp it is, in notifying the UI. So that's two. Storing the state changes and notifying the UI. How can it notify the UI? It has a method called set state. Okay, so every time I try to play, tap or call the method play, set state is playing through, then the render will rebuild. The entire build function. This entire build function will rebuild every time you try to call set state for that one, which is something not doable in a stateless widget. Okay, next question. What is your best suggested method in creating a responsive layout to adapt both? Well, there are a couple of things that you can use now, depending on what widget are you. Most of these are widgets as well, and some of them you can use a controller or utility class. But without using a package, I would recommend you checking first constraint. Now, constraint box. I think I can stop sharing so that probably you'll be here and view. Like at least that's most for the I think I can stop sharing here. Okay. To answer your question on what's the best responsive layout, you can use constraint first. So constraint layout allows you to set as maximum width or the minimum width depending on the specific layout we're targeting, whether it's a large screen or a medium screen. You can compute that as well through a media query. I mean, you can combine using the media query with the constraint box, and you can confirm whether it's running on a large device like a tablet or a small device like an iPhone SE. Those are the first steps. But other than that, like media queries maybe answers a lot of your questions if you're not using package. But again, if you're moving forward, I think there are a lot of package out there, like that will help you eventually. But yeah, start with constraint and media queries. Okay. Not sure if I can hear it. Let me just switch my mic or speaker again.
Hey, Mr. Joshua.
Okay, there's another question. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Right.
So we can still go for a few more questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hopefully, all of you guys are still awake.
Is there any reason why we should use Flutter over React Native or Cordova, which is also similar to frameworks that are developed and released way before Flutter was even developed by Timothy?
Great. So again, in terms of reason, like it really, like I can speak for everyone, but it really depends on either the two things, either like the preference or the business use case. So at least from my last job at freelancer.com, we are also using Cordova back then with an Angular tech stack and deploying mobile apps to web apps to mobile. But again, two parts, like business or preference. In terms of like giving you a reason, like it all comes down to like who are the developers of your team? Like, are they familiar with Dart language, or are they more familiar with the JavaScript language? So in those cases, you would have to weigh in if there's a reason for you to use Flutter over these two things. But on the next part, if you're on the preference part, if you're just starting with Flutter, or if you're just starting with React or Cordova, I recommend you trying out the two. Like there's no best or single best for all use cases. Like React has been it's been there for a while and may be like popular to a lot of senior developers out there, or a lot of mentors that can teach you how to use React or Cordova. But in terms of preference, depending on how you use it or the developer productivity that you had using these technologies, you can weigh in like what suits you. In terms of like the technicality, you have to discuss that with your team. And yeah, like those are the things that you have to consider on team level or organizational level if you're using Flutter.
Due to time constraints, I think this will be the last question.
Sure.
But if you want to show like the results of the live demonstration, I think there's still a bit of time if you do want to.
Sure thing. Like yeah. We can finish it if you want to.
Okay, yeah. Let's continue then.
Okay, all right, great. I think we still have, a couple of 5 minutes or something. Not sure. I think that's on the calendar invite. Yeah, great.
Okay.
Do you still have more questions? Like, What?
Shafiq, could you bring up the questions instead? If you don't mind.
I'm looking at your bed, like you're ready. I feel like I'm ready to sleep as well. Oh, what caused you to this?
So I used Flutter for the first time.
Okay. Well, again, I initially like it was for business, like working at freelancer. Like we have a team of 14 engineers for each of the platform, Android and iOS. We're a big team, and eventually, like there are a lot of issues in terms of like the feature parity. So, for example, on the web, they're releasing a lot of features, and for mobile, like since we are separate teams, some team, for example, the iOS team may be releasing this specific feature on the earliest time, for example, January, but for Android, we are delayed because of some specific technical issue that we have to deal with. Now it's going to be released on February. So there are a lot of things to consider, but on our case, one of the issues that we thought of was the feature parity, meaning whatever feature you have for Android, you have to match it for the feature that you have for iOS. So that's what made me think that we should start using Flutter for our apps.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, especially if you have big teams, like there's a lot of decision and there's a lot of pull reviews going on there.
What's the hardest thing to manage if you are working out team, especially on Flutter?
Oops. Right. Okay, I think that's a good question. It's a great question. Like, please, the hardest thing to manage, I think, or do in terms of like the team is, since it's a new language, so probably not everything that you may need. Like, for example, a package may not be there So you either have to understand how to create a package. I think the focus is a bit lost. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have,
should be fine.
I think it's blurred, right? Like.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay. So at least that one, like if some of the package is not available, you will have to deal with writing native code, which is with the help of platform channels. But again, it's not. I think there's a lot of well-written articles and documentation about that one. But I think that's probably one of the most challenging parts, especially if your team is kind of like new to Flutter and they're not aware how platform channel works, how to write a new package, how to publish a package. So, yeah, things like that.
All right. I think that's the last of the questions we have.
Okay.
So thank you so much. I'm pretty sure this is actually really insightful, and I think the teams for the teams it's really insightful for their oncoming submissions. So thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge, especially the live demonstration.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
All right. So thank you everyone for attending today's session. And I just want to thank the speakers again, because it was really insightful for us to learn about user interface and about Flutter. And I'm pretty sure it helped in your current project and submissions. So a little update. There will be a final submission tomorrow. So just remember to submit it early. And I also want to thank the judges and mentors today for the training and mentoring session on AirMeet. Lastly, please do not miss the next session on 19th March, which will be on the topics Ideathon to innovation and building your startup. And I also want to thank the sponsors again. So our sponsors, silver sponsors, StreamYard. Our gold sponsors, Wantedly. Our platinum sponsors, AirMeet and PitchSpot. Our prize sponsors, Google. Our online venue partner, Google Developer Space. Our education partner, PSB Academy. And last but not least, the community partners, Google Developer Experts, Google Cloud, GDG Singapore, Google Developer Student Clubs. And to follow more about session, please follow our social media channels for more updates in Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Welcome to Flutter Engage. Today is a key milestone for Flutter with the launch of Flutter 2. The big news in Flutter 2 is that we broadened Flutter from a mobile framework to a portable framework, unleashing your apps to run on a wide variety of different platforms with little or no change. You can think of Flutter 2 as a free upgrade for your app. With Flutter 2, your app can target 4 additional platforms: Windows, macOS, Linux, and the web. We asked our friends at G-Skinner to create a demo app that spans all these platforms.
We decided to build a scrapbooking app called Flutter Folio. So I'd like to invite you to visit flutter.gskinner.com, where you'll find more info, source code, and links to the app. Ultimately, we were able to build an app that runs great and feels at home on 3 form factors, 5 OSs, and the web, while reusing over 95% of our code.
Flutter isn't just being used outside Google. Over 1,000 engineers inside the company are using Dart and Flutter to develop apps today. One of the largest apps from Google using Flutter is Google Pay.
We decided to rewrite everything. We ended up with 35% smaller code base, 1.1 million lines compared to 1.7 million lines. And at the same time, our tech debt went down by 90% on a per engineer basis. Now, once the rewrite was done, we also found that our engineers were 20% more productive in terms of feature implemented because of the rewrite. We were able to take the iOS engineers and Android engineers and get 50% engineering efficiency immediately because they were all working on the same thing.
Phones come in so many different shapes and sizes, and one of the latest trends is foldable phones. One great example of this form factor is the Surface Duo from Microsoft.
Today, we're happy to announce that we're collaborating with Google and bringing foldable support to Flutter. We're contributing code to enable Flutter apps to take advantage of these new opportunities with devices like the Surface Duo, but also enable it on other devices from manufacturers like Samsung and others.
So let's talk about portability. Today, we're delighted to announce that Flutter's support for the web platform has hit the stable milestone.
Now, the web has many strengths, including ubiquity and reach. So if you're building a Flutter app, you now get to reach users outside of app stores. And with the power of URLs, users across operating systems or device types could be directed to any part of your app, from links that are shared by friends, clicked on in search, from an email, from anywhere.
I want to show you one example of the kind of app that shines really well on the web. iRobot is the company behind the popular Roomba robot vacuums, but they also have coding robots that empower the next generation of innovators. iRobot built their app with Flutter, and today they're launching the web version of their experience. So here you can see the app running in the browser, using the same code as their tablet app. Today, we're delighted to announce that we're also opening up desktop to the stable channel of Flutter, enabled with an early release flag. This release lets you produce standalone executables for each platform, macOS, Linux, and Windows. On Linux, Canonical has been a fantastic partner.
We not only enabled Flutter for Linux, we also worked with the Flutter team to publish the Flutter SDK as a snap in the Snap Store, the App Store for Linux. By publishing the Flutter SDK as a snap, we've made it very easy to install and set up your development environment to build mobile, web, and desktop apps with Flutter on Ubuntu. Flutter is the default choice for future desktop and mobile apps created by Canonical.
There are even more screens out there beyond the kind of operating system that you might have on your phone or your PC. Toyota are building Flutter right into the heart of their core product.
Today, we're excited to announce that Toyota is partnering with Flutter to bring a best-in-market digital experience to vehicles by building infotainment systems powered by Flutter. We see working with open source software as a positive investment towards our in-vehicle user experiences, and we look forward to playing a role in the open source Flutter community.
Let's now go one level deeper and talk about Dart.
I'm very happy to tell you that we have shipped null safety for Dart. So now the type system helps you eliminate null reference bugs. This is the biggest change to Dart since we added sound static types in Dart 2. With null safety, we didn't just add non-nullable types to the type system, we also added a slew of features like smarter flow analysis, late variables, and required named parameters, so that your Dart code isn't just safe, but easy to write. Dart gives you more than most other languages with non-nullable types do. Null safety in Dart is sound. That means that when your program is fully migrated, the type system guarantees, like a mathematical proof, that no non-nullable expression can ever evaluate to null. A fast language is no use if you can't productively write code in it, so next, Kenzie's going to talk about developer tools.
Now I know what you're thinking. Framework improvements are great and bring all sorts of new and improved functionality to you, but usually they also come with some breaking changes to your code. Well, fear not, because what we've also done as part of Flutter 2 is created a tool called Flutter Fix. This is a sample app that hasn't been updated in a couple years now. So now that I updated to Flutter 2, there are some analysis errors to address. You can see that it's using a couple deprecated APIs. So let's click on one of these warnings and see how we can solve the problem. I can see the deprecated member here, as well as the quick fix icon. And the quick fix option allows me to automatically migrate my code to the new API. So now I can see my code has been updated and the warnings have gone away.
Our developer tools are another example of the unique flexibility of Flutter, built with Flutter, for Flutter, and integrated into whatever tool you're running. As of right now, there are over 15,000 packages for Flutter and Dart from big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Adobe, Huawei, Alibaba, eBay, and Square. We're also today announcing a major update to our Flutter plugins for several core Firebase services: authentication, Cloud Firestore, Cloud Functions, Cloud Messaging, Cloud Storage, and Crashlytics. We've updated all these packages to support sound null safety. But there's another major package we're releasing today.
We're excited to announce an open beta for the Google Mobile Ads SDK for Flutter. This is a brand new plugin that provides inline banner and native ads in addition to the existing overlay formats. We've been piloting this plugin with some of our early customers in a private beta program. So Musica is one of them.
We've had amazing metrics showing an increase of performance since we made the change. We saw a 350% increase on impressions with a 43% increase on CTR and 13% increase on our eCPM.
The Google Mobile Ads SDK for Flutter is available today for you to download from pub.dev.
Flutter is the first UI platform that is designed for an ambient computing world. And this vision is unique to Flutter, a portable toolkit for building beautiful, native, fast experiences wherever you might want to paint pixels on the screen.
I'm a design manager within UX.
I'm a design manager on the material design team.
I'm a UX designer here at Google. UX designers on a day-to-day basis design interfaces, navigation models, UX patterns for a lot of different apps and services.
The UX design family at Google is really broad. We have a lot of different specializations that go into what contributes to the user experience.
Google promotes a culture of autonomy and sort of self-direction because that's where a lot of innovation lies.
I think that's a way for each person to grow and help them build their career here.
Google cares deeply about good design. Larry has this design anecdote, a toothbrush test. He wants us to build experiences that users use twice a day, every day, to make some meaningful difference in their lives. We build new ways of doing that, whether it's via video or you can send some new beautiful emoji that our team has worked on.
Designing a product where 4 million people use or billions of people use, that's scary.
It's hard to get out of bed every day and think about a billion users, but it's easy to get out of bed every day and think about making something useful for a billion users and doing your best to create that.
I think that's the best part of it, where I helped change the UI in a way that's more usable and more efficient to users. And that might help each person and individual on a day-to-day basis. It's a very humbling experience.
I can fondly recall moments where I would be sitting on a plane or on the train and see someone pull a device out of their pocket, fire up that thing that I'd worked on, and not make any fuss about it, but just go, use it, do something with it. It's wonderful.
design sprint started at Google about 10 years ago in a vision of a stronger UX culture. Many people contributed to that. Many leaders helped build, improve, refine, and bring to their own practice as an innovative new way to solve business problems.
Regardless of the outcome of a sprint, in many ways, just the collaboration aspect that sprints can kind of put into hyperdrive tends to last longer than the sprint bounds itself.
What I love about the sprint methodology is it's not just this great methodology that's fun and engaging and brings teams together. It is actually driving true innovation and business value at Google.
To have these true moments at work where you elevate that thing that matters the most to you and to your teammates, and there's no politics, there's no distraction. You're just focused on that most important work, and you're doing it and making progress on it in a way that feels right.
There were countless experiments and failures and successes and tweaks along the way. One of the big breakthroughs was when we figured out how to plan a customer test fast enough to have that be the end of the week.
People like to think, a design team goes off in a cave and then they come back with some tablets about this amazing design work. And this was the total opposite. Let's bring together all these people who already have ideas about what the product should be, and let's figure out a concrete process that allows us to extract as many of those ideas as possible in the shortest amount of time.
So this really took off like wildfire. In my whole career, I've never seen an organization shift so much after something like this came to happen, and then everyone was embracing this way of working together.
And as we look towards the future, we're becoming increasingly distributed. How we collaborate and work synchronously is changing. And that's why I'm excited in 2021 to bring together the community inside of Google as well as outside of Google to reimagine what a design sprint can be.
Developer Student Clubs train thousands of student developers globally and work with their communities to solve real-life problems. Google selects amazing students from across the globe once a year to be a Developer Student Club lead and start a club on their campus. These leads believe knowledge is power and that technology can do extraordinary things for the world. They take on the responsibility to help students learn and empower these students to solve real problems around them. Join us in building a global community for students. Developer Student Clubs are university-based communities where students learn about Google technology and use their skills to solve local problems. Welcome to the Developer Student Club's 2020 Solution Challenge Demo Day.
Let's check out the Solution Challenge.
Let's do this.
Okay, I'll present my screen.
Welcome to the Google Developer Student Club's 2021 Solution Challenge. The mission of this challenge is to use Google technology to solve for one of the United Nations' 17 Sustainable Development Goals, aiming to end poverty, ensure prosperity, and protect the planet. Win cool prizes, mentorship from Google, and swag. Get help along the way from Google at training events, code labs, and hackathons. Submit your solution by March 31st, 2021. Register today. We can't wait to see what you build.
Let's get started.